Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books off the shelf, blow the dust off of them, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so much. I'm Tom Galley. Joining me today, we've got Tony Pisculi.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And his choice today for our 10th episode. You realize this is our 10th episode? We've made it to double digits.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, phenomenal. And a phenomenal choice of a book for this momentous occasion.
I'm just realizing we should have done this one last episode because the title of this book is Nine Princes in Amber.
Missed opportunity.
Damn it. So this is a fantasy book by Roger Zelazny from 1970, and is going to be a recurring theme with me. This is a book that I discovered pretty early on in my reading career. This was actually I found the science fiction book club when I was in high school or maybe even 7th or 8th grade. And joined that, and I got 5 novels for a dime.
I remember such things.
Which was just such an amazing thing at that time. And so this was one of my selections. And I chose it for the cover, which had a dude fighting some sort of saber-toothed tiger. And because it was the 5 books of the first series in 2 different volumes, by using 2 of my picks, I could get 5 books, which seemed pretty frugal to me. So yeah, that's why I bought books back then, by the page count.
Yeah, that makes some kind of sense there.
Yeah.
All right. So favorite, why?
Favorite. So one of the reasons it's a favorite again is because I came across it early, and so it had sort of a formative effect on my views of fantasy and what fantasy is and could be and should be. But also because Zelazny's kind of an amazing writer that just kind of pushes my buttons. And this book in particular is just wonderfully evocative fantasy. It's, all right. So I forgot to look this up. There's a person who wrote a book called The Rhetorics of Fantasy, where they break down fantasy into different categories.
Okay.
And then the 3 broad categories are, you have portal fantasy, which is like Narnia, where you have people from the ordinary world and they travel through a magic portal to get to a fantasy world. The Thomas Covenant series, which we talked about last time, also along those lines. And then you have second world fantasy, which is like Game of Thrones, or I assume the Gap series with second world science fiction. I don't think that has any connection to our world, or does it?
It is set in the future of...
Oh, okay.
It does actually come from Earth.
Interesting. And then the third category for fantasy is what's called a secret history, where the fantastic elements have been there all along. They're just hidden from view. So anything to do with cryptozoology or someone who runs into a unicorn in the modern day or anything like that, it's like the unicorns have always been there, but they hid themselves away, and people with the right knowledge or incredible luck will stumble on them. And one of the things I like about Nine Princes is it combines a portal fantasy with the secret history, and that you have this, you've got a sort of the real world, which is Amber, and everything else is a reflection of it, including our world. Our world is a reflection of Amber. And so it's possible to get from our world, which we think of the real world, to this fantasy world, which is actually the real world, through something like a portal or something. But also people have sort of been coming and going from our world for centuries, back and forth between our Earth and Amber. So, yeah.
So those who have the blood of Amber can
Yes.
actually walk. They call us shadows. We live in a shadow of Amber, right?
Yes.
Can walk through shadows by an act of will. Those of us not so lucky in our ancestry, the magic portal thing, the tarot cards that they have. And in later books, there's actually a little bit of actual portal that pops up.
What's the actual portal that pops
Well,
up?
once we're introduced, and this is in the second series of 5, right?
Yeah.
Once we're introduced to the courts of chaos, right? Their version of magic allows them to jump from location to location using the power of the Logris, where they can pull things through anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one of my favorites as well. I don't honestly. I remember discovering this in high school, and I kind of seem to remember that it wasn't finished at the time. That I got to read 5 or 6 of the books, and then I had to stop and wait for a while for the rest of them to come out.
You must have encountered it right around the time of the first book of the second series, The Trumps of Doom, right? Because the first 5 books are a complete sequence and they stop. And for a long time, that's when I read them, that's all there was. Yeah. So I didn't have that sense. I had just a full arc and it was done and great. I mean, there was more to the world. There was more that could be said and done. And these characters' stories weren't over. But
yeah, I'm relatively sure that whenever I encountered them, the second series had been started.
Yeah.
Because I remembered being just, what? What? How many?
I had the same feeling when the Trumps of Doom came out and he started the second sequence. It's like, because the first 5 books I encountered all at a whack and I just ripped through them. It was like binging on Netflix. And then I had to wait years between volumes for the next 4 books to trickle out after he released Trumps of Doom. It was so frustrating. Yeah.
Yep, indeed. This one of the things that always strikes me about Zelazny, honestly, I don't know that I've read anything else but his Amber series. I don't know if he's written anything.
He's written quite a bit. Yeah, he's won Hugo Awards for some of his other books.
I've read cooperative pieces with him and somebody else. He's written several of those. I know that I've got sitting on my bookshelf. But with these books, one of the things that's always struck me structurally is that they don't start at the beginning, proceed to a climax, and wind down to an end. They start at the climax, proceed to an end, and go to the next climax, and then that's where it's cut off for the book. Right. So, I mean, we open here with our hero with the worst case of amnesia ever, waking up in a hospital, trying to figure out what happened, why he's there, who he is. And then when we get to the end, he's escaping from prison.
Yeah. So that him waking up with amnesia has become kind of a fantasy trope. I think like a lot of the Elder Scrolls games borrow that, and I've seen it in other places as well. And it's a wonderful way to introduce a fantasy world to you because we have our POV character. And if they already know all about the world, how are they going to let us in on it without a bunch of as you know, Bob? But he doesn't. He knows nothing about this world. He knows nothing about Amber or his capabilities or even that he is of the blood of Amber because he's got amnesia. And he quickly finds himself in a situation where he's just tap dancing conversationally as fast as he can to try to cover up the gaps in his knowledge while extracting information from people he encounters who clearly know way, way more than he does and who are possibly trying to kill him. So I love that whole opening sequence. It's just wonderful. Yeah.
Indeed. And he's stunningly good at that game.
Yes, he is. Yes, he's very clever, and Zelazny does a wonderful job of that.
I love the fact that while he's actually escaping from the hospital and he's got the administrator, he demands cash payment. And in his head, he's thinking, if he comes across with any amount of money, then I know that there's something shady going on here.
Yeah, that's a wonderful observation.
Yeah.
He also, it's interesting, right from the get-go, he's discovering things about himself that mark him as unusual, which is an interesting thing for someone who has amnesia to sort of be discovering, the world and who you are, but also knowing that I seem to be stronger than an ordinary person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I seem to heal quickly.
Yes. So you mentioned the tarot, and this was another thing that I found just incredibly exciting when my first read through of this idea of these tarot cards, which serve as basically as sort of fantasy cell phones / teleporters. There's a deck with cards for everybody in the family. This huge extended family of I did the math at one point and I can't remember. 9 brothers, but then I think there are also 4 sisters.
9 brothers, 4 sisters are the lead characters there.
Yeah, and then there's a handful of dead brothers and sisters as well. So something like 20 siblings at one point, I think.
And that's the major arcana.
Yeah.
Right. We're given to understand there's, a much more extensive minor arcana in the deck.
Yes.
That almost never get mentioned. Those are going to be characters of convenience whenever we need somebody down the road. Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus trumps for locations themselves.
Yeah. Yes. So he creates this really evocative world with the shadows and the trumps and the true earth, Amber. And there's a war for the crown, which is very Shakespearean. Everybody's just got the basest motives and they're politically scheming all the time. And that's all very intriguing. And the thing on the icing on the cake for me is that he keeps going deeper and deeper into the lore. And he doesn't do much of it in this book. Well, he does. No, he does. Because Amber, well, actually, I don't know if that happens in this book. Amber, we discover, is not the real Earth. Amber is a created place.
We discover that far down. We do not get that in the first book.
Yeah. We're
well into the series when that comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have this idea that, they all have this father, Oberon. The mother is never mentioned, so I don't know where all these children came from. If he's like Zeus and just going around despoiling the maidens of the nearby villages. But Oberon also had a father who is long presumed to be dead, which is Dworkin, and Dworkin's the one who created the original Trumps. And Dworkin, this mystery dead person, actually puts in an appearance at the very end of this first book.
He does. He helps, unwittingly, he helps Corwin escape.
Yeah. And we learn something more about the Trumps also, that they're not these things, these artifacts that get handed down, that they can be created sort of at will by people who are sufficiently talented. So that's fascinating too. Yeah.
There's an awful lot to this thing, yeah.
All right, so here's a question. Is there anything you don't like about these books? Because I have a bunch of peeves.
Anything I don't like? So many of the characters are completely one-dimensional to me.
Yes.
Right? We have the strong but dumb brother. We have the hopelessly pretty and completely ineffective sister. We have the mischievous brother. We have it's... and heck, I mean, we end up with 10 books. We've got time to explore some of these people in a little more depth.
The sisters get pretty short shrift, which is a shame. But this is a book from the 70s, and so... yeah, I guess that's to be expected.
It is 9 princes in Amber. It's not 9 princes and 4 princesses.
Right. Yeah, or just 13 siblings. One of the things I always do when I revisit a book, I don't know why, but I always think, how would I make this into a movie for today? Mm-hmm. And then right away, I mean, assuming you can ditch the title, 9 princes is too many. That's too much screen time wasted on minor characters. And 4 princesses, frankly, isn't enough. They're not given equal weight here. So I would hack that number down to something reasonable and give some of those juicy roles to some women. Let's boil it down a little bit. Yeah.
One of the things it does, and it's not so prevalent in this first book, but it definitely becomes repetitive and irksome to me as we move on, is the extensive descriptions of shifting through shadow. And in particularly later in the book when he introduces the concept of the hell ride. It's like, how many pages of random sentences pointing at, a blooming flower, bubbling mud, bats flying through the air. This goes on for pages. Or, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating slightly.
No, you're not. It's pages and pages, and I have exactly the same peeve. At the very first time that it happens, it's fascinating because Corwin has no idea what this process is. He only knows that his brother Random is doing something, and he's taking them out of Earth to somewhere else, through some sort of magic. But once we learn that he knows how to do it too and what the process is, that's it. We're done. We never need pages of this again. But Zelazny gives it to us.
He does time and time again. I suspect towards the end that he's actually beginning to pad the novels using this.
Yeah, because it's very stream of consciousness writing. It's not. It doesn't tell us any story. It doesn't reveal character beyond the very, very first one. It's just a bunch of stuff happening. Yeah. There's another one very similar to that, which is Walking the Pattern.
That's the first description, like you say, because we've never been introduced to it before, and Corwin doesn't know what to expect, so taking us along with him in detail through that is pretty cool. I don't think we ever need to have that detail again, except there's actually a fight that happens on the pattern in a later book.
Oh yes, that's exciting.
So that does become important.
Yeah. But that's a trope that repeats throughout the books. Many people walk the pattern, which is this. It's set up as this thing that's incredibly difficult to do. You can only do it if you're of the blood of Amber. Even then, it's very, very dangerous and will possibly kill you. And yet people seem to be doing it like every other page.
Well, yeah, and they make a thing of saying the words. It's difficult and it's dangerous, and yet there are no examples of anybody. The only people who fail are people that don't have the blood of Amber. I think there's one or two times that somebody steps on the pattern and is, poofed.
Yeah.
But nobody that ever has business walking the pattern ever fails to walk the pattern. And they don't even tell cautionary tales about, you remember Cousin Bob, made it halfway through, got stuck at the second circuit,
Yeah. So the pattern is the thing. So this is jumping ahead again. The pattern is the means through which this world was created. The pattern stands in opposition to chaos, and it's very.
The Logos is chaos's version of the same thing.
So by creating a pattern that allows a sort of island of order to exist in a sea of chaos, and that is what Amber is. And so walking the pattern gives you a degree of power over Amber and its shadows.
Yep. That would be, when playing the game of what superpower would you like? The ability to walk through shadow would be a pretty nifty one.
It would be amazing. I think he's a little bit inconsistent with what exactly that means, but there's a sense in which it's kind of a fantasy multiverse. Mm-hmm. You could find, if you're not happy with, a world where Shakespeare wrote the works of Shakespeare, you could find an actual parallel Earth where Bacon wrote them, and that's just the reality. You could walk there, which is the fun thing. Yeah, they do some really mundane yet interesting things, like a walk to a place where diamonds are lying loose on the ground everywhere. Because I'm in need of a fortune at the moment. Yes. One of the more important ones later down the road again, there's a place where they make a polishing compound for jewelry that happens to burn violently in amber. Gunpowder doesn't work in amber. You can't bring guns to amber, but that is a fascinating twist. So this is what the second book is about. The title of the second book. Is that just in the second book? It's the second book. Yeah, it's called the second book. It's called the Guns of what? Amber would be the likely. It's not called the Guns of Amber, though. It's called the Guns of something else. So you have this fantasy universe where everybody's, they fight with swords, they use bows and knives. And in the second book, this guy who's got Corwin, our main character, who's got designs on the throne. The Guns of Avalon. The Guns of Avalon, invents a gunpowder substitute and brings long guns in amber and basically lays waste to the entire population. Yeah. Now, I loved the description of their attack on Amber, of taking, they have this massive army that he and his brother, was it Blaze? I've forgotten which brother. We're talking about the first book? No, we're talking about the first book. The book that we're actually talking about. But they have this massive land army that they've built, and also this massive fleet that they've built. And one brother goes with each to carry them through Shadow to Amber. And the just unrelenting attacks, both natural attacks, using the power of the Jewel of Judgment to unleash storms on them, guerrilla-style attacks with the locals sniping at them, they start out with these armies of hundreds of thousands of people, and they end up with a couple of thousand at a staircase, which in my mind, the staircase ascending the mountain, single file, is a mile long easily. And the good guys, or I shouldn't say the good guys, but the Amber's defense forces are coming from above, and their army is coming from below, and it's mano a mano, literally one step at a blood-soaked step time. I just love that description. That's a wonderful sequence. That's another sequence that goes on for pages and pages. If I was writing it, it would have been much, much shorter. And yet I didn't mind reading it because it's fascinating that they really do have to fight for every single step. And there's no, the storm came and we lost 2,000. Snipers in the night, we lost 4. There's no level of detail he's not willing to plumb in that sequence, which is exactly what I'm criticizing him for in the Shadow Walks. But he only does this to us once, right? He only does the assault on Amber once. So we can forgive him, I guess, that always the first time is fine. And then, of course, what's amazing is all the shock troops are in front, and because it's single file, there's no way for them to support each other. And so, it's just two armies clashing on this endless staircase and getting, skewered and pitched off and so on until, it's Blaze at the front,
Yep.
and he fights for a while. And because he's of the blood of Amber, he fights with the strength of 10 and carves through a lot of these ordinary men. But eventually he gets taken down. And then it's just Corwin who makes it all the way to the top.
Makes it all the way to the top.
Yeah.
Makes it into Amber with as few survivors. Now, Blaze, a moment in this book that completely fails to work for me. As Blaze is finally dislodged and falls off this precipice, presumably to his doom. So somehow, in the milliseconds between perceiving that Blaze has lost and is falling, Corwin reaches into a pocket, pulls out his stack of trumps, flings it accurately to his falling brother, and then, of course, he's joined in battle and has nothing else to do. But presumably, Blaze is able to catch this thing, wounded and beat up and tired and falling as he is. And as he's plummeting, he's able to extract a useful card, calmly stare at it long enough for the contact to be open, and he happened to pick somebody that would invite him through so he can be saved. Talk about the least believable rescue scenario ever.
Yeah, that's pretty implausible.
Yeah.
I someday maybe I'll sit down and do the math on that. I mean, how fast would he have to throw that deck of cards in order to catch up with his brother, number one? And why didn't he get skewered? And how long does Blaze actually have to make contact if he falls? If we assume the staircase is, as you say, a mile high, which is pretty freaking high.
Yeah. Well, when I was saying a mile, I'm thinking, you would walk a mile to get from the bottom of the staircase to the top. So if it was a 45-degree staircase, it would only be half a mile in elevation.
Okay, that's a pretty steep angle, though. So
so
more realistic, it would be 30
that.
degrees. So,
but I mean, that's just the staircase at the end. They've been fighting their way uphill from before that. So I mean, let's say it's a mile-high precipice. I mean, we could do the math and see how many seconds does he actually have.
Yeah.
To calmly open, sort through, find a likely candidate, and make contact, because it's not instantaneous.
Yeah, he talks. It's sort of almost a process of meditation that you have to sort of clear your mind, and the front of the card goes sort of glassy, and then takes on a sort of three-dimensional appearance. And this takes moments, not instants. Yeah. So, do we have a way to do footnotes on our podcast?
I'll look into that and see. Maybe we'll have to come back. Maybe this will just become a running thing, as we'll add footnotes to the end of each episode as they deserve.
All right. So what else do we have to say about this? I thought I was going to go on and on and on about this book because I love it so much, but I feel like I've said what I needed to say.
Well, I felt like this was likely to be a long one just because we both enjoy this. And this, it's a term that I've used repeatedly, and I'll just continue to use it. This is a rollicking good read. I mean, I just enjoy reading this. It's a fun story with fun characters.
It's a lot of fun. So getting back to the idea of favorites and why this is a favorite, one of the things is that I encountered it early, so it made a big impression on me, but also because there are 10 books, I came back to it again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy coming back to it. So as we discovered with Zodiac, I didn't enjoy coming back to that as much as I thought I would. I still enjoyed it, but this, I loved it almost as much as I did when I read it the first time. It scratches that itch for me. It's just wonderfully fun. Makes me want to just tear through the next 9 books as fast as I can. Yeah.
This is an issue. This is a challenge actually I'm having with the podcast is that it's interrupting the way I would normally read, because normally at this point I would stop and read the next 9 books before moving on to something new. But no.
Well, I've read this sequence fairly recently, actually, in the last few years, and I think I've read this entire sequence at least 5 times through. So yeah,
that's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
I think I've read this in its entirety since COVID. I think this is one of the things that I did pick up once I realized what housebound actually meant.
Yeah.
And there was just a sort of delight in knowing this is what I'm going to be doing for the next umpteen days.
That is one of the things, speaking of favorites, that the pandemic really sort of highlight for me, is that I found myself unable to appreciate new things as much. And so I found myself turning back to old favorites again and again because I wanted to bury myself in something, and I just didn't have the energy to tackle something new. And so I was like digging through my shelves, my metaphorical shelves on my Kindle, for old favorites like Amber series and The Hobbit.
Well, I think it's, like comfort food. This is comfort reading.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Speaking of comfort reading, our next episode, and I say episode, is going to be Star Trek Log 10 by Alan Dean Foster. This is the novelization of the Star Trek animated series.
I can't wait to read this. So this is another book that I haven't read yet. I've read some novelizations many, many years ago, but I don't think of the animated series, only of the original series. So yeah, I'm excited about this.
Well, you know what? I'm going to save that little tidbit for the episode itself.
Okay.
All right. Enjoy, everybody. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.